Following his dismissal of Imfred Ebel, Christian Wirth decided to halt all transports to Treblinka on August the 28th, 1942, allowing time for a clean-up period to commence in the camp. Abraham Krischbecki was assigned to work in one of these so-called clean-up teams, created by Wirth to dispose upon the piles and piles of Jewish corpses that had amassed throughout Ebel's reign. Once all of the bodies had been collected and dumped into the large burial pits in the extermination area, transports were resumed on September the 4th, 1942. In the meantime, SS Hauptsturmführer Franz Stangl had just arrived into Treblinka, having recently been relocated from his post as commandant of Sobibór. On September the 4th, 1942, both Stangl and Wirth, anxious to see how their new model would work, oversaw the trajectory of the first new transports, from disembarkation to selection, separation, undressing, and finally, of course, gassing. Indeed, from September the 4th onwards, a new era commenced for Treblinka, one in which the killing process, from start to finish, had been properly formalized. Long gone were the days of Ebel's haphazard chaos, where new arrivals would often be shot at upon leaving their transports, and terror was preferred as the main method of control. Instead, Wirth favoured a method that relied upon faux friendliness, deceit, and speed. Accordingly, upon arrival into Treblinka, new arrivals were given a welcome speech, in which they'd be promised that they had arrived at a transit camp, or, alternatively, a labour camp. Quite often during such speeches, the SS would even apologise for the conditions that the Jews had to travel in, and promise them fresh beds, food, and water, usually asking for their cooperation in return. It is noted upon that, on some occasions, the SS speeches were either so convincing, or rather that the Jews were so desperate to believe them, that new arrivals would clap or even cheer. Occasionally, postcards were also distributed among new arrivals, with the promise that they would be posted home, wherever that was, to family and friends. Indeed, why would one be given a postcard if they were only to be killed anyways? This psychological trick is very similar in manner to Ebel's cashier at the end of the undressing barracks, who would give the Jews a receipt for their valuables before they entered the tube, which led to the gas chambers. Both implied that the Jews will survive long enough to reap the rewards of said deception, whether that be a potential response from their relatives or receiving their valuables back after the shower. Regardless of the exact details of whatever faux story was given, the overarching message was always the same. The Jews would eventually be put to work or relocated, but before this could happen, they must be disinfected. You see, at the time, typhus was a rampant issue across Eastern Europe, thereby acting as a very convenient reason for the necessity of any of these new arrivals to have a shower to disinfect themselves. Given that the Jews would also be filthy at this point, as they had arrived from cramped, dirty ghettos and had been transported in filthy conditions, the prospect of a shower would certainly seem very attractive. Either just before or immediately after the Jews had received their welcome speech, they would then be separated into two groups, with one group consisting of men and boys who were older than 13, and the second group consisting of women and children. Then, as was common practice at all of the Aktion Reinhardt death camps, a very small selection would take place, in which the SS would recruit a handful of Jews to perform specific tasks within the camp, like shoemakers, cooks, or seamstresses. Once this selection had been finalised, the Jews not selected for the special tasks, as they were called, would be herded throughout the camp gates to move on to the next phase of their processing. In the Stangl era, the Jews were processed through the camp at high speeds, but with a far lower emphasis on terror. Wirth's reasoning was that with so little time to absorb what was happening to them, or more importantly, where they were, given that the black pillars of smoke from the extermination area would certainly be visible, the Jews would become confused, and hence far more compliant. In fact, it was usually only when the Jews entered the tube that the SS and Treblinkis would totally abandon the kindly facade and utilize force, violence, or terror to speed up the final part of their victims' processing. Once in the tube, as the Jews were naked and defenceless, the mask, as it were, would normally come off. Hence, following Wirth's reforms, Treblinka had finally adopted the same modus operandi that was used in all of the other Nazi extermination camps, an emphasis on foe-friendliness, deceit, and speed.